Thank you so much for staying with us. Welcome back again. This is still Breakfast Central. Now, no one prays for a fire outbreak, but in the event of one, it is much more beneficial to know the safety measures and protocols to protect yourself, friends, and loved ones. Now, cases of fire outbreaks across Nigeria and across the continent have become a perennial problem. On Saturday, the 1st of February, the Osun State Fire Services battled a fire that raged through a house in Alapata Street, Modakeke-Ife, which claimed the life of an elderly woman. It was reported that the fire incident started from the woman's room through her lantern after kerosene inside it spilled on the floor and on the foam mattress. This is sadly a familiar series of events for many who have been affected by domestic fires. Now, back in the studio to tell us on how to protect ourselves against domestic fires, I have Ugochi, the Safety Chic. Ugochi, good morning and welcome again. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good to see you. All right, so let's get into this. Now, particularly with Lagos State, data on fire outbreaks shows that homes where fatal fires occur are rarely protected by smoke detectors. So how well informed are people, and should it be a situation of legislation? Because I know in many places in Europe and in the West, you cannot build any building without the implementation, without putting in fire detectors. It's just part of the safety measures that are put in place legally. So how do we get this conversation going?
Okay, so around here, when people hear smoke detector, they think it's expensive. And most times people just want to run away from anything that is expensive, forgetting that
a fire is more expensive.
If it's going to help you at the end of the day, you should see what you can do. Now, the thing is, it's always important to check your particular environment, your context, to decide what firefighting equipment you would need. Depending on your home, some people's home would maybe just need a fire extinguisher or a fire blanket, but then some buildings would need a smoke detector. Okay. So you see, it all depends on the context. What kind of a home is it? What kind of building is it? You know, that actually determines. Now, in terms of legislation, well, it's not really a bad idea for it to be part of legislation so that it's compulsory and everybody
part of the
knows
building
that,
code.
Yes, it's part of it. Because that is what, like you've already mentioned, developed nations do. Make sure that it's part of the building regulations so everybody knows this is what is expected. But here in this part of the world, since we understand our peculiar terrain, we have to do a lot of advocacy, raise a lot of awareness, and also let people see that you shouldn't always be bothered about cost when it's actually going to protect you, because the cost of health and safety is actually much more than that financial cost you're worried about at the beginning.
All right, so let's go through this. If there was a fire outbreak, let's use a home, because what you would do at home versus what you would do in a building such as this are a bit slightly different. So if there was a fire outbreak in a home, what's the first thing to be done?
Okay, so when there is a fire outbreak at home, you have 2 minutes to step out of that house. 2 minutes. Okay. 2 minutes. So you need to get out and stay out. What we find is that most times people run out and they saw that, oh, I ran out, and then they suddenly remember, oh, there's something I should have picked, and then they go back in. You should not go back in. And this is why it's important for every home to have a fire escape plan. What happens is, if there is an emergency and there has never been a plan before, there's a tendency to panic and you would make mistakes. Yes. But if you have already known what to do, to some extent you'll be a bit coordinated. So every family should have a fire escape plan, and it should be practiced a minimum of twice a year. So everybody knows that, okay, if a fire starts, we're all supposed to run out in so and so direction and meet at so and so point. That information needs to be it needs to be captured succinctly.
And you know, as you're talking, I just remember my experiences growing up, and I'm remembering so many things. Like because it's hot air rises, the cooler air and more breathable air and oxygen is at the bottom. So a lot of times you're also told to drop down if by that time the smoke has become so much. In a
smoke-filled building, you go down low and crawl out, because when you're in a smoke-filled building, the smoke is rising, right? And you are down to the floor. So to some extent, you can still breathe and you can see.
For the time.
And that's why you need to move as quickly as possible, because time is really of the essence.
I also remember growing up, and they would take us to the local fire station, and they had like miniature houses that the kids we would go through and sort of walk through a fire plan, and you know, a small explosion in your ear here, because anything can explode because of a fire. A door closed here. You don't touch the handles when they're hot. If you're in a room, you use a wet towel to sort of slow down the speed in which smoke is coming. And I'm just realizing all of this stuff is coming back to me. As you said, it's ingrained, because I had to do this every single year while I was growing up. But now thinking to the fact that
school?
Not here.
Okay.
But now thinking back to the fact that that information it's so ingrained in me that even though I haven't had a fire experience, I still remember what to do.
You would know what to do, because that is actually the importance of training, passing that information. Because truly, when something happens, if you have been informed before, you would know what to do. Now, I'm really happy you mentioned this, because we don't even have this information being shared in schools. And this is one of the reasons why safety professionals like myself started visiting schools to teach the children, because nobody is too small to know these things. And again, sometimes incidents happen when parents are not even around, caregivers are not around. So how would the children know what to do? So if we teach people these things, it becomes a part of them, and then they're able to act when they find themselves in situations. So I'm all for people knowing what to do ahead of time. You shouldn't wait for the incident to happen and then you are being reactive, you know. No, you should know what to do ahead.
We talked about a fire incident in a home. Now, in a building such as this, most of the buildings, even in Lagos, have a building code. So there are some form of fire detectors and some places sprinklers as well. But we've seen more health and safety inspectors going around and people having like fire marshals on different floors and muster points. What's the idea when you hear a fire alarm in your building? And I've been guilty. Even when we're doing drills, I would still go back and pick up my bag, you know? And they tell you that just going back to pick up your bag could be the difference between life and death.
Yes, because, you know, like I mentioned earlier, that you have 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes. A lot can go wrong in 2 minutes. So you know, you are already calculating, oh, I can make it. But what if you do not make it? And so having those things in place are just a great way to ensure that people remember. And a lot of times around here, people take drills for granted. Because it's just drills. No, it's not just drills. It's just preparing you, because the day the real thing would happen, you will not even be sure if it's a drill or if it's a real thing. But because you've been conditioned to act, you would act. So we shouldn't just, you know, take drills for granted. Drills are very important. They are lifesavers, as a matter of fact.
All right. So going back to the home, what are the most common causes of domestic fires that you've seen?
Okay, so faulty equipment, faulty electrical equipment, then the cooking area, the gas cylinders, distraction when cooking. You know, this thing that I don't want to say ladies, but this thing that happens when you're going to cook and while the pot is on fire, just, let me just check Instagram for a bit.
And then just 5 minutes later, and I'm confessing on Pan-African television, I've burned the bottom of a pot like that before. And I had to throw it away so nobody would know. But now they know. I understand. Okay, so that distraction could actually cause problems, you know. So faulty electrical equipment, distraction when cooking, and I think those are the common ones. Oh, and then we have people using candles near flammable materials. And, you know, you might sleep off or for some reason forget and this thing could fall. I mean, if your candle is not on a candle stand, it has no business being even with anywhere. A candle stand.
Because you have to be conscious that this flammable material, like the case you just mentioned, it was because the kerosene had spilled and then there was fuel. Okay, so 3 things come together for a fire to start. So fuel is anything that can burn, right? Then heat, sufficient high temperature, and then oxygen. So now all these things were present. So of course a fire had to start. So we have to be careful about keeping these flammable materials near things.
So what would you recommend for a home? A fire detector, a smoke detector,
fire extinguisher, fire
and a blanket. All of it together, or mainly?
Well, again, it depends on your context. Because the size of your house depends on what you would need. And that's why we don't really give a one-size-fits-all for everything, because your context is very important in it. So you cannot just do copy and paste. Somebody needs to come and assess your home and see, okay, or maybe you're good with a fire blanket, or you're good with fire extinguishers, not extinguisher, and then maybe you need a smoke detector.
And even those need to be checked on a regular basis because they expire apparently.
Yes, they do.
Okay, so how do we talk to kids about safety? Because you made a really important point in terms of some of these things can happen when parents or caregivers are not around. And going back again, one thing that was drilled in my head was stop, drop, roll.
Yes.
And I just think to myself that, again, years later, I still remember all of this.
So when I visit schools, as a matter of fact, this is one of the chapters covered in my child safety storybook. So when I visit schools, I teach them using a story, and then I ask them to repeat the words, then we practice so that it sticks. Because once children are able to internalize it that way, it's easy for them to remember, and then you tell them, oh, you need to share with as many people as possible. You see, that makes them want to spread information. Then another thing that's really important is times have changed. When we're teaching children about things, we need to tell them why they're doing it. Don't just say, oh, I'm the parent, I'm telling you because I'm the one that gave birth to you. No, they need to understand why it is important. That would help them to comply.
Okay, so fire safety for kids, teaching them how to do it, going over it with them, and again,
practice,
telling them why, not just, you know, just saying because I said so. All right, so fire is quite fast, and you talked about you have 2 minutes to get out of a house or get out of a building, and that is very true. When you look at some of, if you watch like ID Discovery and stations like that, they talk about how fast a fire moved. And then you also have situations where you open a door and then the fire comes in because it's been fed oxygen as well. So fire is fast. 2 minutes, 5 minutes can become life-threatening. Yes. And most people don't have fire extinguishers in their home. Are there alternatives? We've only talked about the safety, the fire blankets. What else can be used? And then, okay, let's go to the kitchen. Because I'm just everywhere right now. But let's go to the kitchen. There's a fire in the kitchen. We've seen situations where people have used detergent, powder detergent and water to put out specific types of fires. Not all fires answer to the same thing, correct?
Yes, not all. Yes, because there are different classes of fire, and depending on what type of fire it is, that determines the extinguishing agent that's going to be used. In the kitchen, the very popular one is if you are cooking and then the pan catches fire, you cover it. It's called smothering.
It denies it of oxygen, correct?
Yes, because you have cut off the oxygen supply to it. Yeah. And that's why it's also advisable that when you have bins, ensure that your bins are such that can cover, so that even if the fire starts within the bin, because it's covered and oxygen is no longer there, so we still have fuel in there, there's high temperature, but because there is no oxygen, that fire would starve, it would die out, yes.
Okay, so what do you want to leave us with? Because at the end of the day, this may be one conversation that somebody happens to catch, and they may not have another conversation for a while about fire until they see another story and they're like, oh, that's so sad, that person died. But really, with 2 minutes to get out of a building or out of your home sometimes, distractions, and then, you know, just getting scattered with the emergency and the panic, what do you truly think people should be left with in this conversation? Okay,
so everybody should have a fire escape plan in their house. I need you to just, in your mind's eye, not even in your mind's eye, go around your house, look around it, ask yourself, if something were to happen in this place, what would I do?
But isn't that a problem with a lot of Nigerian homes? The only way out is usually the front door because we have so many bars on the windows.
That's actually one of our challenges, because something that you have put to protect you because of theft could actually become a problem to you. Because ideally, every room should have a minimum of 2 exits, a minimum, so that if something is happening from the other one, you would have an alternative. And if that alternative is blocked, then what do you do? But then again, I always say that in an emergency situation, you have to choose the lesser of 2 evils. Yes, it's better to have a broken finger than to have a broken hand. And it's better to have a broken hand than to die. So at the end of the day, you'd have to weigh and make your choice. But it's really important that you have a fire escape plan, have a plan down, and it should be communicated to everybody that lives with you. It's not enough for you to know it alone, because what if for some reason you are not present when something is going on? What would the others do? So that fire escape plan is very important.
Okay, so that's number one. Anything else you want to add that is a priority you really think that needs to be?
So they should have a firefighting equipment in the house. Okay. And not just having it, it should be checked so that you are sure that it's not expired, and you should know how to use it. Yeah. Very important, because I recently spoke at a school, and after training the teachers, somebody explained to me that a situation came up and the fire extinguisher was in the house, but in that moment they realized they couldn't use it. So if not that a neighbor was able to come in and save the day, and it's actually, that was a defining point in the home, because they now made sure that everybody had to learn how to use it. But what if it was worse, you know? So we don't have to wait for something bad to happen. We should just learn, because really no knowledge is a waste.
All right, so Ugochi, thank you so much. Our very own Safety Chick giving us some fire safety tips there. She's going to be back next week, and we'll be talking a bit more about some domestic and personal safety tips that you should have for yourself and your loved ones.
To watch more videos just like this, make sure you subscribe right here. And of course, check out more videos right here.